As we move along here and we start, let's talk a little bit about what the conceptual basis of our DAT system, that Defense Arrest Tactics system, is. Here's what we're teaching every officer in the state of Wisconsin. This is a system of verbalization skills coupled with physical alternatives. So the first and foremost is that whenever you deal with public, we would like you to try to control individuals simply through using your presence and dialogue. If nothing more than walking up to an individual, asking them or telling them what to do is effective, this is the preferred method. This is what we're asking you to do. Your goal is always to get people to comply voluntarily. That's what we want to teach you on the front end, presence and dialogue. However, even the best efforts of the most skilled officers to gain voluntary compliance do not always work. Sometimes you will have to use physical force to achieve control and accomplish your legitimate law enforcement objectives. So we recognize that presence and dialogue may not always be effective. And so we want to give you some tools and some skills to be able to overcome that. Now, the manual on the right that you had seen previously on another slide, professional communication skills. What does it mean to be a professional? These are some of the characteristics that we're teaching our officers on the front end that we're looking for. Being very ethical, having respect for the public, your appearance, demeanor, diligence, your competence. Do you know your job? Do you know how to be effective as an officer? What is your attitude? Do you have an overall good attitude when dealing with people? So this is an important part of the professional communication skills. Within that same manual, it states, if an officer's words are not working to resolve an issue, the officer may need to use physical interventions, which are tactics learned in the DAT manual. Even when physical force is used, it is important to come full circle. What does that mean? That means that we simply train our officers, and don't take this literally, be nice until it's time not to be nice, and then be nice again. The not be nice time is really taking action. Going physical with somebody if you have to. Whatever intervention you chose was appropriate at that time, that's that time not to be nice. But then once that's over, and you've controlled that person in front of you, we're telling you once again, we want you to get back to nice again. Full circle. Be that professional. All those characteristics that we outlined previously. But again, sometimes the subject will actively choose not to cooperate with you because because complying means going to jail or leaving some place that he or she wants to stay in. When words do not work to achieve compliance with a subject, it is time to act. What does this mean? It means that you either disengage and or escalate your use of force, one or the other. It doesn't say one is better than the other, it says one or the other. You do this. We also teach and give our officers a skill set to understand. We use acronyms a lot in law enforcement to help us understand concepts. And one of them that we talk about that identifies 4 conditions when it is time to stop talking, be done talking, and it's time to act. What are those things? We teach officers in front, and listen to this, folks. When there's danger in front of you, and this is all dependent on training experience, when there's danger, when you or someone else is in imminent danger of being assaulted, hurt, or killed, we want you to act. We're not talking anymore. When there's some sort of an overriding concern, whether you think that a matter of a higher priority requires your immediate attention, it's time to act. Is there something that says, look, I need to deal with this right now, I need to act upon it? No progress. Whenever you feel that you've exhausted all of your attempts to verbally persuade somebody to do what you want them to do, okay? If you're at the point of an impasse, no progress, we're getting nowhere, we're done talking, I'm asking you, I'm telling you, I'm teaching you, it's time to act. Escape, this is whenever a subject unlawfully flees your presence, it's time to act as well. So now that we know it's potentially time to act, or we're going to act, when can officers use force? Law enforcement officers may use force legitimately when it's needed to achieve control, and that's what we're trying to do here, is we're always trying to control individuals in 5 specific situations. 1, make a lawful arrest. Okay? Another one, to achieve and maintain control of resistive subjects. To detain people of reasonably suspected of committing criminal behavior or crimes, defending yourself or other people, and to prevent escape. So these are the 5 situations where we can use force to achieve control. So once that control or that incident happens and an officer uses force, the 1989 Graham versus Connor court case gives us some guidance in what we should look at to determine whether or not that use of force was reasonable. Give you some background information on this court case. Mr. Graham is a diabetic. He and his friends are out in a vehicle, they're driving around. Mr. Graham feels that he is low blood sugar, he needs to get some food into his system. He has his friend drive him over to a convenience store. Mr. Graham runs into the store, notices that there's a lot of people inside that store. There's a long line. He can't wait. He decides, hey, let's go. Runs back out of that store, gets back into that vehicle, and they take off. Mr. Connor observes, another officer observes this and makes a traffic stop based on the fact that he reasonably believes there's some sort of criminal activity that happened. That traffic stop happens. Mr. Connor comes in and he assists with that traffic stop. And during the detention of the individuals, Mr. Graham specifically, some level of force is used to control him. Mr. Graham eventually is released from this traffic stop because no criminal activity happened. However, he sued, stating that the level of force used against him was unreasonable. So the court said, let's look at this case. And some of the issues here is that what we're going to consider, and again, this is not all-encompassing, it's not absolute, but when deciding if a particular use of force is reasonable, we need to include some of these things. Let's look at the severity of the alleged crime at issue. Let's also look at whether the suspect poses an imminent threat to the safety of officers and/or others, and whether the suspect is actively resisting or attempting to evade arrest by flight. Within this same court case, the court stated that reasonableness, so that's what we're looking at, right? The use of force, is it reasonable? Should be judged under the totality of the circumstances. Very important. Put things into context. What was known at the time? What is the officer dealing with? That's the totality. From the perspective of a reasonable officer. Not reasonable citizen, not anyone else, but from a reasonable police officer. Very important. At the scene with similar training and experience. The court says, look, we understand that there's officers that have a different level of training experience as well. And so when we judge this level of reasonableness, that's the criteria we're going to use. The court also noted that officers must frequently make split-second decisions. What does that mean? That means they understand the human factor involved in doing things. So when you use force as part, so now we know how to evaluate it, but when we're going to do it, it needs to fall into one of these three categories. What you did has to be either a trained technique, one of these 49 DAT competencies that I talked about in the DAT manual, or it has to be a dynamic application of a trained technique, not quite the classroom model. So when we train officers, we have the luxury of being in a controlled setting where we can teach things, slow things down, break them down, give an opportunity to redo it, right? This is what the state of Wisconsin allows us to do. But when you look at that, it could be a dynamic application of one of those things, not quite perfect. Or number three, a technique not even trained, but justifiable under the circumstances. So number three is saying, look, even if you weren't trained in whatever you did, if it was reasonable, okay, it's a legitimate and justifiable use of force. Let's make things even more complex for you to understand. Threat assessment. Very important for every police officer. This is an ongoing process that we teach officers all the time, that when you have contact with people, we want you to constantly assess and reassess the level of threat in front of you. Are they tense or agitated? Is the person in front of you tense? Are they agitated? You seem upset. Any signs of mental or emotional disturbance? How about their reactions at the time? Are their reactions to what you're dealing with them normal? Or are they odd? And this is important when you might be dealing with what could be considered a low-level incident, yet the behavior of the individual is way off the charts. It doesn't mirror what should be the normal reaction, so to speak, for what you're dealing with. Are there any other early warning signs or pre-attack postures? Well, what is that? That's a lot of stuff. Okay. Well, here's what we're going to teach you. We're going to give you some of those early warning signs and pre-attack postures, officers. I'm going to teach you what some of them are. 1,000-yard stare. You know it when you see it and when it's been in front of you. It is that look that somebody looks at you, not that they just see you, but they're looking through you. And once you've seen it and felt it, you can't replicate it in a role-playing setting. But I can assure you from any officer that's dealt with it and saw it, knows it. It's the hairs on the back of your neck and on your back that raise up because what you are looking at in front of you is very unique and bizarre. But the individual's literally looking or feeling like they're looking right through you. How about a boxer stance or a handset? How is this person positioned? Shoulder shift. Are they starting to get themselves into a position? 90% of the population is right-hand dominant. Do you see some of this shoulder shift happening? And we've seen this time and time again in video. How about target glance? Are they looking at your weapon systems? Are they looking at you? Conspicuously ignoring you. You're talking to them, and as though they're not even there. They don't even know you. You know they're there, but they're trying to ignore you. Hey, who, me, what? type of things you might hear, they're just ignoring you. Exaggerated emotional attention, moving in an exaggerated way. Again, things just don't seem right. Very theatrical, animated, people's hands are they're up in the air, they're elevated speech, very exaggerated. Ceasing all movement as well. At some point, literally they stop, the wheels in their mind are turning, a decision is made. It's, again, an early warning sign of pre-attack posture. Again, not all encompassing, not the only things that are taught, but things that have been seen over and over again. We are telling officers, if you see this, okay, it's important. Why is it important? Why is all of that of threat assessment and pre-attack postures, early warning signs important? This is why it's important. We're training you constantly to evaluate situations in front of you. We're looking for early warning signs and pre-attack postures to predict potential assaultive behavior. We're trying to predict it. And then we're trying to prepare for it. And in some circumstances, justify an earlier use of force option. The idea here is pick up on what's happening in front of you. Don't wait to be assaulted before you act. If this is happening, you may have to act first. So, that is some background information and education in a nutshell in terms of what we teach officers, what we're using to evaluate officers' use of force and conduct in public. This next portion now I'm going to take and I'm going to break down some of this video. Some of it is going to be at normal speed, some of it's going to be at a slower speed. The slower speeds allow us to see things a little bit clearer. And so we're on the same page. This is the Lorberger video, and this is the start of it. So we look at this first section.
What the fuck did he do? What did he do? Why is he getting arrested too now?
So we look at that first section, we ask ourselves, what are some of the threat assessments that are here? What is the officers looking at? They're looking at a large crowd. They've identified the fact that they had almost like a mob mentality, if you will. They seemed angered. There was profane language being used. People are in close proximity. For law enforcement, controlling distances and proxemics is very important. We have a lot of tools around our waistline. What are we hearing from Mr. Wenzel? Why is he getting arrested too now? Confrontational. Arguing with Officer Wicklund. So, as I play it again, I'm trying to ask that you think of some of the things that I just outlined in the previous slide.
What the fuck did he do? What did he do? Why is he getting arrested too now?
All right, the next segment of the Lorberger video.
What did he do? Why is he getting arrested too now?
Okay, clearly you should see Officer Wicklund push and try to create some distance from Mr. Wenzel, who's interjecting himself into police business in public as they're trying to effect an arrest. He's in close proximity. He has access to Officer Conley's gun, something that Officer Wicklund cited in his report. I was concerned that the proximity of Mr. Wenzel's argumentative behavior, the fact that he was in close proximity of Officer Conley's gun while Officer Conley's effecting an arrest. Officer Conley's hands are here, his gun side's there, Mr. Wenzel standing right there, that concerned him. The question, why is he getting arrested too? Questioning something. Officer Wicklund creates some space, he simply pushes the individual back and says to him, get back. At this point, Officer Wicklund has some responsibilities. He's a cover officer. He's protecting the officer, he's even protecting Mr. Wheeler and himself. Those are his responsibilities. So once again,
What did he do?
you see the officer right here is effecting arrest, his gun side exposed, very close proximity. So let's look at the next part.
Why is he getting arrested?
Okay, there's the language that we've been hearing. Hey, F you, F you. Again, where's our threat assessment? This is an ongoing process. It becomes elevated. The officer cites that he sees the fact that Mr. Wenzel's pretty emotional, he's pretty engaged in this incident. This is excessive emotional attention. He's uncooperative. Not only that, he is disorderly. Loud, profane language in public clearly meets the elements of the offense of disorderly conduct. So let's watch that again.
Why is he getting arrested?
Let's look at that from a different angle though. In the front end, I showed you that stirrups video. And again, to set the scene, again, here's Officer Wicklund. He's going to walk around over here and place his back up against the wall to be in the best tactical advantage he can be in as a cover officer. You hear